that our children will say, well, they might not have been the greatest generation, but they are a pretty good generation. Thank you, Mr. President, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Kaka.
Senator from Louisiana. Senator, a quorum call is in progress. If you would, without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that Senator Kirk and I speak in succession for up to 15 minutes, and that the Democratic side then have 2 speakers.
Without objection.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, we have just learned that Ahmed Abdul-Qadir Warsame was arrested by the United States military in April. This news has just come to us, learning that this man, who fought for no country and wore no uniform, and under international law is considered an enemy combatant and therefore not a prisoner of war or an American civilian criminal, has been taken to a U.S. criminal court to be granted full U.S. constitutional rights in a prosecution in the civilian courts of the United States located in the Southern District of New York. This man was taken outside American territory for attacks outside U.S. jurisdiction, for acts against non-U.S. citizens. And yet he has been charged with a U.S. civilian crime and been given the full rights of an American citizen or nationalized individual. And I think we have made a grievous mistake. We have made a significant change just this week. We have violated the principles set forth by President Lincoln and President Roosevelt, who well used military commissions to handle enemy combatants and not providing them full U.S. constitutional rights for actions taken outside the United States against non-U.S. citizens in the war on terror. I'm very worried that this foreign terrorist who was taken abroad for attacks committed abroad is now going to have the full constitutional right to confront his accuser and have all information used in his trial exposed. This means that under the new policy, the United States may be forced to reveal intelligence information critical in the war on terror, especially against al-Qaeda, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and al-Shabaab, when otherwise a military commission could have kept that information confidential, leading to further success by the United States. We should ask at what cost this prosecution will come. The previous proposal by the President, which he backed away from, was to bring the author of the 9/11 attack, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, to central New York at a cost of estimated $75 million to protect the court, the judge, the prosecutor, the jury, and their families. The President backed away from that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed decision, but apparently he has now made that decision again with regard to Ahmed Abdul-Qadir Warsame. My question is this: what threat is now being posed to the people of New York? What threat is being posed to the federal judge? What will the prosecutor fear for the rest of his or her life in participating in this unnecessary civilian prosecution? And especially for the jurors and their families that now will be subject to scrutiny throughout the jihadist world by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and al-Shabaab. Why is this unnecessary threat now going to be posed to these Americans? That's why 39 Republicans and Democrats joined me in a letter to Attorney General Eric Holder, saying that this decision was a mistake and should not be repeated. That we have now created undue attention to the people of New York by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, al-Qaeda itself, and al-Shabaab. And remember, following our successful attack against bin Laden. We now estimate that al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and al-Shabaab are the most dangerous and heavily armed subsidiaries of al-Qaeda. Al-Shabaab alone has over 8,000 men under training. And as one intelligence expert said, some of them at the level of training equivalent to a U.S. Army Ranger. How are we going to protect the judge in this case for the rest of his or her life? How are we going to protect the prosecutor for the rest of his or her life? And how are we going to protect the jury and their families for the rest of their lives because of this mistake made by the Attorney General of the United States? At what cost will this prosecution come? And will it be paid by the city of New York, already heavily strained in finances, a New York State famously short of funds, or the federal government, which is also short of money? And what happens if Ahmed Abdul Qadir Warsame is found innocent? Many released terrorists, we already know, have already returned to jihad, as the probability indicates he surely will. In the wake of the debate on deficits and debt, on a famous criminal trial in New York, we may have overlooked a fundamental decision, a mistake made by the Attorney General of the United States. The 9/11 Commission taught us a critical lesson, that terrorism is not a law enforcement problem. It is an intelligence and military problem. And well-established principles under Roosevelt, Lincoln, Bush, and yes, President Obama, using military commissions, should be used instead of subjecting the American people to the increased threat, the increased cost, and the terrible precedent we have just set in giving an international terrorist for acts committed overseas against foreigners full constitutional rights. It is a decision, I think, that we will regret, and many of us may quote the 9/11 Commission report and its clear findings in highlighting the error that was made. And with that, Mr. President, I yield to the gentleman for Louisiana.
Mr. President.
The senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise again today to urge all of us, Democrats and Republicans, to come together and put serious deficit reduction proposals on the floor for full debate, an open amendment process, a constructive debate, and votes and action. That is the way we can move forward and resolve this greatest threat we face as a country, out-of-control Washington spending and debt. Now, Mr. President, we are making a little bit of progress in that regard. After months and months of the distinguished majority leader putting every other issue under the sun on the floor but spending and debt, we've finally forced this central issue to come here and be debated. Last week, many of us banded together, conservatives who were pushing for this debate, and said, enough is enough. We should cancel the July 4th recess. We should block it so that we stay here and debate the central issue. And that's what we did, and we successfully did that. Unfortunately, the majority leader then proposed that we stay here, yes, because we had blocked the recess, but not put this central issue on the floor, move to yet another topic. And we said, no, we're staying here to get to this debate, this important issue, the greatest challenge we face right now as a country, and we successfully defeated his move to another topic. And so finally, this little bit of progress, we're here on the floor at least talking about the right issue. But we don't yet have a strong, meaningful, underlying proposal to act on. We have a sense of the Senate resolution. That's a good basis for debate, I suppose. But of course, we need more than that. We need serious proposals to debate and amend and vote on and act on. And that is the important next step. Now, when I made these remarks yesterday, the distinguished senator from New York, Senator Schumer, was in the chamber and suggested that Republicans, including myself, had not gotten behind a serious, credible proposal. Specifically, he said, wait a minute, the Ryan budget, with which you voted for, doesn't reduce the deficit at all. I said at the time that's incorrect, but I didn't have the numbers in front of me. In fact, I looked it up. The Ryan budget does significantly reduce the deficit from $1.4 trillion this year to $391 billion at the end of 10 years. That's a major, major reduction. As I said to the senator from New York at the time, my preference even ahead of that is the Toomey budget, which we produced on the Republican side in the Senate. That reduces the deficit from $1.4 trillion right now to zero over 10 years. It balances the budget over 10 years. Obviously, major, major progress. Again, going back to the Ryan budget, which Senator Schumer brought up, it contains $6.2 trillion in spending reductions compared to spending in President Obama's budget. It has total deficits that are $4.4 trillion lower than that in the President's budget. It brings total federal spending to below 20% of the economy. The President's budget is always above 23% in that figure. So it puts us on a path to balance. And again, the Toomey budget, my first choice, actually achieves that balance within the 10-year budget window. Now, in contrast to that, I have to say it's very unsettling that the distinguished majority leader, the majority in this chamber, have not even tried to meet our mandated budget responsibilities. Section 300 of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, that's the federal law that controls the budget process. Section 300 says that by April 15th of every year, a budget resolution is supposed to be passed. Well, we're 83 days and counting past that deadline. 83 days and counting, and no serious attempt to even try to meet that legal mandate has been made by the majority, by the distinguished majority leader. We had a few budget votes, 3 Republican budget proposals and President Obama's budget. The Obama budget got 0 votes on the Senate floor. The majority leader produced no budget proposal. The Finance Committee, led by the majority, produced no budget proposal, not even trying to meet our responsibility, an actual legal mandate under the law. So through the chair, I would ask Senator Schumer, where is your proposal? Where is your attempt? Yes, we have put forward specific proposals that dramatically cut the deficit. When is the majority going to even try? Again, 83 days and counting this year past that deadline. Of course, last year, this body, under the same leadership, produced no budget. And so we're 448 days and counting in total under the Budget Act. In that time, by the way, our debt has increased $3.2 trillion. Mr. President, that's why we need serious proposals on this Senate floor to debate, to amend if necessary, to vote on, to act on. Act on. At least we're to the topic, but we need serious proposals before us to act on. And again, I urge all of my colleagues to embrace a 3-tier approach: cut and cap and balance. Immediate cuts, a budget, passing a budget resolution, which we're mandated to do, that includes immediate, meaningful, real cuts, that's cut, cap, structural budget reform to cap spending in every major category of the budget to ensure that we stay on that path to a balanced budget, and balance, a requirement in the U.S. Constitution that we have a balanced federal budget through the Balanced Budget Amendment to the Constitution. I support that. All Republicans in this body have co-authored that. That is the third crucial tier of this 3-tier approach: cut, cap, and balance. I hope we get to the consideration of those and other important proposals. I hope we not only have a debate around a sense of the Senate resolution, I hope we have real, meaningful proposals on the floor, an open amendment process, an open debate, and votes and action on this most critical issue. I've endorsed specific proposals. I mentioned two of them. They dramatically reduce the deficit. I've co-authored the Balanced Budget Constitutional Amendment that enforce discipline, the straitjacket we need. I support the cap concept for the medium term to get us on that path, but we need to act on that on the floor in a bipartisan way. I urge that as the next necessary step. Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Senator from New York.
are we in a quorum call?
Yes, we are.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, first I want to thank my good friend and colleague from Minnesota, Senator Franken, for leading this little debate here today. The subject, of course, being the potential of default by the U.S. government, a subject many of us thought we would never have to discuss. And Senator Franken, I hope people who did not get a chance to see his speech, I'm sorry, I had hoped to be here, but we had the final vote on free trade agreements in the Finance Committee. But I hope people will look at the speech, because it's a very, very erudite, thoughtful, and compelling document. And it's on a subject that deserves that kind of attention, which is the danger of default. In our entire history, we've never defaulted on our debt. America has always kept its promises, but some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are threatening to make us the first generation of Americans that does not pay its debts, that does not keep its promises. Earlier this week, the President said we should reach a deal within 2 weeks in order to avoid roiling the financial markets. We Democrats are working in good faith. We're committed to making sure our nation does not fail to meet its obligations. My colleagues and I on this side of the aisle are working diligently to find spending cuts, many of which come from programs we strongly believe help this country, in order to come to a final agreement. We are also identifying tax loopholes to close. But I must ask, what exactly are my Republican colleagues doing? They are stalling. They are demagoguing. They walked out on the bipartisan budget negotiations and are continuing to insist that we can't raise a single dollar in revenue, no matter how wasteful the tax break or how generous the subsidy. Mr. President, the shocking truth is that our Republican colleagues seem to be willing to tank the economy simply to help out the very most privileged who are already doing well. Let's face it. Middle-class people, poor people, they depend on government programs. But if you're wealthy, you don't need you don't need help to send your kid to college. You don't need to go to a clinic to have your teeth looked at in case they're falling apart, where you can't afford kind of high-priced, fancy dentist. But if you're wealthy, how do you get breaks? You look into the tax code and lobby Congress, whether you're a corporation or individual, to get those breaks in. That's how the high-end folks benefit in terms of this government. And so to say that all of those are off limits is not class warfare. It's a simple fact of life. It's a fact of life that well-to-do, whether they be corporate or individual, benefit from tax expenditures, whereas middle-class and poorer people benefit from spending expenditures. And yet our Republican colleagues say one whole side is off limits. That's putting politics over the economy. In fact, these actions seem to indicate that they might be deliberately tanking or want to deliberately tank the economy to harm the President's re-election chances. That's a tough thought. I shudder to really believe it. But when you look at the evidence, it leads in that direction. These are not actions of leaders. Forcing the U.S. into default to score political points is playing with fire. You risk undermining the future credit of the United States and do enough damage to the global economy that it could cause another financial crisis, not unlike the one we saw in 2008, from which we still have not recovered. All to score political points, all to help those, the one segment of society which, God bless them, has done very well in the last decade. Mr. President, I also want to talk today about a subject that's often ignored in debates over the debt ceiling. These debates can seem very abstract and the potential consequences very remote. It's why my colleague from Minnesota decided to lead a debate in this regard. In fact, Mr. President, the consequences would affect every American who wants to take out a mortgage, every parent who needs to take out student loans to send their kids to college, every American with a credit card. It would even affect the price of gasoline and the price of food. The impact of a default will not just be felt on Wall Street or in the mythical world of bond markets, but in every town, every household in the nation. And the consequences will not be short-lived. The repercussions of a default will stay with us for years or even decades. J.P. Morgan estimates that even a technical default, the failure to pay interest on our debt for just a few days, would result in the cost of U.S. Treasuries increasing by 50 basis points. Well, what does that mean to the average household? Most households don't speak in terms of basis points. Well, mortgage rates are often set at 150 points above U.S. Treasury. That means 1.5% above U.S. Treasuries. If the rate on Treasuries goes up 50 basis points, it goes up another 0.5%. And so the cost of a mortgage for a family with 30-year fixed-rate mortgage worth $172,000, just that alone, that little few days where the United States doesn't pay its debt, costs $19,000 to that family. The cost of interest on a credit card would also increase. A family carrying a modest balance, $3,300, would pay an estimated $250 more in interest every year. In total, a default or even a near default could end up costing American households $10 billion in increased borrowing costs every year. The same J.P. Morgan study tells us that a 50 basis point increase in the cost of U.S. Treasuries will decrease our GDP by 1%. Leading economists estimate a 1% contraction in the GDP would result in 640,000 jobs lost. These are jobs we can't afford to lose. In addition, the stock market would also go down significantly, costing all Americans who are investing for their retirement or savings to send a child to college. The typical American would lose $8,000 to $12,000 in his or her retirement account. J.P. Morgan also estimates that the value of the dollar would decline 5 to 10% as a result of a default. There are significant consequences for the future of the dollar if this happens. We should all be asking ourselves, what happens if the dollar ceases to be the global reserve currency? But even if my colleagues across the aisle don't want to consider that, they should certainly think about the impact of a depreciated dollar on their constituents. Higher borrowing costs to the government would also increase the deficit, exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. So when they cavalierly say, let us default because we have a huge deficit, it's actually an internal contradiction, because defaulting will make the deficit worse. According to J.P. Morgan analysis, the deficit would increase by $10 billion a year in the short term, $75 billion in the long term. And worst part is this, all of it, these costs would be self-inflicted wounds. We're fully capable of paying our debt, just as we always have. but some are threatening to intentionally default. To borrow a phrase from the President's economic advisor, Austin Goolsbee, this would be the first default in history caused entirely by insanity. And let me just say this. Every American family has debt, just about. Most of us have mortgages. Now, let's say we have a mortgage on our house and we've gotten the house and we're living in it. All of a sudden, we said to our bank, I'm not going to pay my mortgage unless you do ABC. You've already signed to pay that mortgage. What happens? What happens? You're not living up to an agreement you made. Your house is foreclosed upon and you lose it. The analogy is the same here. For the U.S. government, to default on purpose would be cutting our nose to spite our face and hurt the very citizens of this country. So I want to say this to my Republican colleagues. How do you plan to explain this to your constituents? Do you think they'll believe the political games are worth the increased cost? I sincerely doubt it. And I want to say to my Republican colleagues, because so many of you have trifled with the idea of not paying our debts, if God forbid it happens, hope it doesn't, for the good of the country, but if it does, you will bear the blame. Not a single Democrat that I'm aware of has said we want to default. Many, many Republicans have said they want to default. And so you don't have to be Albert Einstein or a Ph.D. in biophysics to know who is risking default, who is trifling default, and who would cause default if, God forbid, we can't come to an agreement. Many on our side have said, we are willing, if it comes to it, to just raise the debt ceiling if we can't come to an agreement because the consequences are so horrible. Not the other side. No. They are leveraging their beliefs, sincerely held, as a means, they're leveraging, rather, the default as a means to achieve their beliefs, sincerely held. That is so wrong. But the good news is that the American people, and certainly the people who are following this issue, realize that. And as we get closer and closer to the day of August 2nd, they will know who is willing to risk default to achieve political goals. They will know it is not the people from our side of the aisle. They will know it is the people from the other side of the aisle. And that will make the problems Newt Gingrich faced in 1995, I believe it was, when he shut down the government, look like child's play. So I would urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to rethink their position. The time has come for a little soul-searching on the other side of the aisle. You must decide if you're willing to create another economic crisis just to mollify an extreme wing of your party and score political points against the president. You must decide if you want to go down in history as the first generation of American leaders to renege on promises already made by presidents and Congresses, Democratic and Republican alike. In the coming weeks, my Republican friends will have to make a very serious decision. Are they going to get serious about working with us to find a bipartisan solution to our debt crisis, or are they going to put partisan politics above the good of the country? Are they going to say it has to be our way, all the way, 100%, no revenues, or we're going to force the country to default? Or will they put the good of the country and compromise above narrow, ideological, often fear-driven politics? Mr. President, in conclusion, I'm an optimist. I believe my colleagues will come around and join us in finding a bipartisan way forward. I don't base that on anything that's been said. I wish I could. I base it on my innate optimism that Americans, at the end of the day, are practical, problem-solving people, not people who look for self-destruction, self-destructive solutions, rather. So, I ask my colleagues to come around, join us in a bipartisan solution. We are willing to give some. You should be willing to give some. But I can tell you, my friends, time is running out. I can only hope, the American people can only hope, you don't wait too long. Yield the floor.
Mr. President. Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I'm on the floor this afternoon to talk about the issue not only of the day, the week, the month, the year, it's the issue of what to do about the debt ceiling. Everyone around here knows what will happen if we fail to raise the debt ceiling by August 2nd deadline. The United States will default on its loan payments. Defaulting could have catastrophic consequences on our economy as we attempt to recover from the worst economic recession since the Great Depression. Failing to raise the debt limit could send our economy into a tailspin with unthinkable results for the American people. With the stakes so high, we must ask ourselves, how did we get into this position? Or as my constituents back home in Alaska would say, how'd you get into this mess? Over the last decade, both sides of the aisle have played a role in this irresponsible spending that resulted in our current fiscal crisis. At the beginning of the last decade, we had a budget surplus. Let me say that again, a budget surplus of $200 billion, with a projected surplus of $5 trillion for the next 10 years. By the time I took office in 2009, not only had our budget surplus disappeared, we faced a budget deficit of over $1 trillion. Now, the creditworthiness of the United States is in jeopardy. Some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle oppose raising the debt ceiling, citing the need to rein in reckless spending. While I support broad deficit reduction measures, I strongly disagree with those who neglect to recognize the consequences of failing to raise the debt limit and defaulting on our financial obligations. Mr. President, everyone around here knows what will happen if we do not. For the first time ever, the creditworthiness of the United States would be put in jeopardy. I want to step back for a second here and remind everyone that Congress had enacted 74 measures on the federal debt limit, 74 times. So they obviously understand what will happen if the American government defaults on their payments. The ceiling has been increased by both Democrat and Republican administrations and Congress. George W. Bush, first term in May 2003, we increased the limit by $984 billion. In fact, Congress raised the debt ceiling 7 times during his administration. Senate Republicans provided the votes to raise the debt ceiling in 2002, 2003, 2004, and 2006. The importance of keeping a good credit rating and paying the bills is something the American people understand and are doing their very best during these hard times. I hear about this all the time when I'm back home. While the American people understand that defaulting on our loans would only make matters worse, some members of Congress insist on playing politics with the issue even during this economically uncertain times. If the United States government defaults on its financial obligations, it would be the first time in the history of our credit would be downgraded. Let me repeat, never before in the history have we let our creditworthiness be called into question. The consequences are large and somewhat unknown. But let me take a little bit from what the Senator from New York talked about and expand on that. And that is, how does it affect, as I was just asked recently, how does it affect the individual, the person working hard every day, paying their mortgage, driving to work, pumping gas in their car, going on a vacation, just doing the everyday things that Americans do, and in my state what Alaskans do, especially now. They're Summertime, they're out fishing, they're enjoying the summer, kids are out of school, and State Fair is getting geared up in another month. What happens? Well, first off, if our creditworthiness and we default on our loans that are due, our obligations, some immediate things will probably happen. First off, individuals who have credit cards, their rates will go up. Because if you read the fine print of those great credit card bills we get, which are very small and very detailed, they talk about how the rate is structured. And the rate is structured around what happens on the market. And obviously, a lot of the people today have, maybe they have a good rate, maybe 9, 10% on their credit card, but average is probably between 15 and 18%. That interest rate will go up. Home mortgage rates, if you're on an adjustable rate mortgage, it's going to be adjusted up. If you're a small business person, as I have been and am still today, and my wife, there are many businesses that borrow on a 1-year, 2-year, 3-year loan, adjustable rate maybe monthly. Maybe it's an inventory loan because they have a seasonal business. All those rates will go up, assuming they can get a loan. When you think about when you drive your car and you go pump that gas and fill up your tank, and we think prices are high now, oil commodities are traded in U.S. dollars. So the net effect is going to be that dollar is going to have less of a value, which means the price of the fuel will go up and what you pump into your car will increase. 75% of the world markets and transactions across this world are done in U.S. dollars. So if you impact the creditworthiness of the country, the dollar has less faith and credit behind it, which of course costs money, which means things we import, such as fuel, to fuel our cars, our businesses, energy to heat this building, to turn on these lights, go up. So it has real impact to individuals. It's not some global discussion here in the halls of Congress. It's not about just, debt limit and GDP and all these other phrases that people kind of wonder what it means to them in their individual life, but it has a direct impact into their lives, as these examples. What happens to their retirement funds? That a portion of their funds are invested in maybe U.S. government securities. Well, they're going to see a change, dramatic change. The American people, Alaskans, are already struggling. To add this additional burden because we're unable to sit down and work together and solve this problem in a cohesive, comprehensive way is irresponsible. To my friends across the aisle, let me remind you of what Ronald Reagan said, President Reagan said in 1983 to a letter to then Senate Majority Leader Howard Baker. He said it better than I think any of us could say. And this is directly from his letter. Quote, "The full consequences of a default, or even the serious prospect of a default, by the United States are impossible to predict and awesome to contemplate. Degradation of the full faith and credit of the United States would have substantial effects on the domestic financial markets and on the value of the dollar in the exchange markets. The nation can ill afford to allow such a result. The risk, the cost, the disruptions are incalculable. Damage lead me to but one conclusion. The Senate must pass the legislation before Congress adjourns." Close quote. It's amazing how you can take a quote like this from history and just transplant it today. And it's the same situation. At the same time as we deal with this, I strongly believe we must pass a deficit reduction measure. I have supported the deficit commission, the debt commission, and their efforts. I didn't agree with it all, but I agreed that the $4 trillion mark should be hit, and we should try to do our best. Because in order to solve this problem, this challenge, and we all have our sides where we're kind of hunkered down, but I think every time I go back home, and I was back home this last weekend for my short 48 hours, I spend more time, I think, in the plane getting home than staying at home at times. But when I got home, people say it very simply to me, it's a combination. We're going to have to reduce the spending. I don't object to that. We're going to have to create a more fair tax system, which I don't object to. Matter of fact, Along with Senator Wyden and Senator Coates, I've introduced a tax reform legislation that does just that. Lowers the corporate rate, simplifies the individual rates, focuses on a growth agenda with our tax policy, and gets rid of a lot of these loopholes and shelters and tax havens, all these things that people have taken advantage of and paid no taxes, but yet enjoy the great bounties of our country. And we also have to invest. We have to invest in a growth agenda. That means investing in infrastructure, in education, because as you reduce your budget, which I don't disagree with, and as we create a more fair and balanced tax system, we have to do one of the most principal things, and that's continue to help grow this economy. And we have to invest in our infrastructure, invest in a variety of things that grow our economy. Mr. President, this is an opportunity for us to put our country on sound financial footing by passing a broad deficit reduction measure that includes cost savings and increased revenues. When it comes to protecting America's economic security and improving fiscal responsibility, the time is to act now. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I thank you for the opportunity.
President.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to talk about some of the enormous challenges facing our economy, Washington's failure to address those challenges, and a way forward. Today, there are nearly 23 million Americans who are looking for full-time jobs, 23 million. This includes people among those 9% of Americans who are on the unemployment rolls, but it also has to include a lot of Americans who have given up looking for work or who are scraping by with part-time jobs when they really want a full-time job. What makes this even more troubling to me is that among the Americans who are being counted, that 9%, the average length of time on the unemployment rolls is now nearly 10 months. That's the longest ever recorded. These folks are looking for help. They're looking to us for leadership, and they're looking for us to help get the economy back on track by creating a better environment for job creation, economic growth. At the same time, as we've just heard from the previous two speakers, the federal government faces serious, unprecedented budgetary challenges. Washington is now borrowing nearly 40 cents of every dollar it spends. It looks like we'll have another record deficit this year, and we'll have the highest debt ever. Government spending has gone from about $25,000 per household to more than $31,000 per household just in the last 4 years. And the national debt is doubling over the 2008 levels, doubling since 2008. We've hit this $14.3 trillion debt limit, and if we do nothing about it, we're going to end up with an economic crisis, much like Greece is facing today. I just listened to the comments from my colleague from New York and my friend from Alaska, and they're talking about the fact that interest rates might go up unless we vote to extend the debt limit. Well, I am talking to a lot of economists and thinking about the impact it will have in Ohio. If we don't do something about the deficit and debt, when we extend the debt limit again, interest rates will go up. The value of the dollar will continue to go down. Inflation will go up. The point is not that we want to go into default. I hope nobody does in this chamber. And despite what my friend from New York said, colleague from New York, there is no Republican interest in defaulting on the debt. No one wants to default on the debt. But it's just like when you have a credit card in your family. Once you max out on the credit card and you try to get a higher line of credit, you ought to look at your underlying problem. Because if you don't, you're going to get right back into the financial problems you're in. That's what Republicans are saying is, if we do not deal with the underlying problem, which is this huge fiscal imbalance we just talked about, $14.3 trillion debt that's doubled since 2008, then we are going to find ourselves in a financial and economic problem that will result in a spike in interest rates, will result in this negative impact on all Americans, car loans, mortgages, student loans. So this is why it's so critical over the next few weeks as we work through this that we deal with not just extending the debt limit. I guess that's a pretty easy thing to do. Just say, let's go borrow more. We're already borrowing about 40 cents of every dollar. But we have to deal with the underlying problem. So what are we doing here in the Senate to deal with that underlying problem? Very little. This week we're debating a meaningless sense of the Senate resolution This is what's called a non-binding resolution. It won't create a single job. It won't reform a single part of our tax code. It won't save $1 of government spending. It does nothing to address the debt limit. It's a distraction, and that's why earlier today I voted against proceeding to it. Serious times demand serious work. I was pleased when the Senate came together to cancel this week's scheduled recess because we should be here. We pledged to return to Washington and to confront these economic challenges we talked about and the budget problems we face. And I supported doing that, but this has not been a serious effort. By the way, the Senate has not even passed the basic budget for this year. There is no budget, which is highly unusual. It also never passed a budget last year. So instead of talking about non-binding resolutions, we should be talking about a budget. We should have a budget on the floor. We should be debating it. The other side will have issues. We'll have issues to talk about. None of us necessarily agree with one another on the precise provisions of a budget. That's fine. Let's have the debate and end up with a blueprint for our spending going forward. President Obama talks about getting involved and showing true leadership, but to be honest, he hasn't stepped up to the plate. The best example would be his own budget. He's required by law to submit one every year. He did submit a budget. That budget was voted on the floor of the Senate because we don't have our own budget. We voted on his budget. It was unanimously rejected, 96-0. Partly because, as Democrats will say, a few weeks after he submitted the budget, he gave a speech where he said, well, you know, my budget really wasn't adequate to the task. And so he rejected his own budget, in a sense. But he offered no alternatives, no specifics. His own budget, by the way, was so unserious that it doubled the debt over the next decade. And that's why, again, it was voted down by this Senate. But what is our budget? What do we believe in? We should have that debate. We need to know what the numbers are, what the President has for a vision over the next 10 years. That's what the budget is supposed to do. And, of course, we need to know what he will do to help grow the economy. In my view, getting the budget under control is a matter of restraining spending, but it's also a matter of growing the economy. If we don't grow the economy, and that will increase revenues by growing the economy, we won't be able to get out of this deep fiscal hole that we're in, with record deficits, a record debt, and again, an increasing negative impact on our economy. The lack of a true debate on this is not from a lack of ideas, by the way. Senate Republicans have developed a common-sense jobs plan, much of which I think should be and can be bipartisan. It includes just a lot of common-sense ideas. One is to reform the tax code. Senator Begich from Alaska talked about that earlier. That's to make sure that our tax code works better for our economy, that it's simpler, that it encourages investment and job creation. Economists across the board would agree that our current code is inefficient. We should do that as a body. That will help develop the economy and jobs and economic activity, which will increase revenue. We need to rein in regulations. As I'm home talking to small businesses, the first thing they talk to me about is the latest federal regulation. A new one out today from the Environmental Protection Agency, which is impacting my home state of Ohio, is going to result in loss of jobs at a time when we need jobs desperately. There are very specific proposals here. Maybe these aren't proposals everyone can agree to. What are your proposals? Let's debate this issue. Let's pass legislation that forces a cost-benefit analysis of regulations. Let's be sure that the regulators are using the least burdensome and least costly alternative. These are common-sense ideas. Creating a more competitive workforce, making sure that our workforce is competitive for the 21st century, incredibly important. Expanding exports to create more jobs. Energy, being sure that we have the ability to get away from our dangerous dependence on foreign oil by creating more resources right here in this country. These are all common-sense proposals that we should work on because they relate to the very issue we should be talking about this week, which is how to deal with our budget imbalance. The proposal, by the way, also does cap government spending. It does say that we need to have a balance between revenues and expenditures, which is only common sense, because until we get the fiscal house in order, it's going to be very difficult to get our economy moving. It's like a wet blanket over the economy, creating uncertainty, unpredictability. On the budget, let's be clear. The long-term problem is from soaring spending, not falling revenues. This is from the Congressional Budget Office. It's a nonpartisan group. Their job is to give us the data, to tell us what's going to happen with spending and with revenues. This is what they tell us. Even if we keep current tax rates for everybody, in other words, don't get rid of the so-called Bush tax cuts, revenues are still expected to rebound above the historical average of 18% of the economy. If, in fact, the Bush tax cuts do not get extended, which is current law, right now they're expected to end at the end of next year, those tax revenues will be well above the historic average. Instead of 18%, they get up in the next several years to about 20%. Over the last 50 years, it's been about 18%. The deficit is rising not because of lack of revenue, but because spending is now at 24.5% to 25% of our economy, as compared to its historical level over the last 50 years of about 20 or 20.5% of the economy. What's going to happen? Well, CBO has it right there. It's projected to rise on the spending side to 26% of the economy over the next several years, then 30, then 40, then 50% of the economy on spending alone. We talked earlier about the fact that we've gone from $25,000 per household government spending to $31,000 per household in the last 4 years alone. That spending continues to grow, and if we don't deal with that spending, we'll never be able to get the budget in balance. That's the top issue, and again, we have to face this before we extend the debt limit again. If we don't, there will be major economic problems. Look at what Standard & Poor's and Moody's and Fitch, these are the so-called credit agencies, what they're telling us. They're saying, yes, default would be a terrible thing, let's not default. But they're also saying, but if you don't deal with the fiscal imbalance, if you don't deal with the record deficits and debts, there will be major and negative impacts on the economy, and they will be in a position where they will feel they need to downgrade our debt, which means higher interest rates. Having tax rates chase this spending is not the solution. It won't balance the budget. Moreover, it will not spur this sputtering economy to grow and to create the jobs that we've talked about today. It won't work to get us back to work. In fact, virtually all economic theories agree that tax increases harm economic growth. When you tax something, people do less of it. That's why we tax smoking. So if you want economic growth, the last thing we should do is to raise taxes on working, raise taxes on savings, raise taxes on investment. These are not the way to get the economy moving again. Instead, we should be unleashing American entrepreneurs, not putting more taxes on them. Some suggest we must choose between creating jobs and reining in government. Now, my view is the opposite is true. Reining in government can help create jobs. The less the government spends, the more money remains in the private sector for families and entrepreneurs to spend. The less the government borrows, the more savings are available for businesses to borrow in order to expand, as well as for families to borrow for a new home, again, a new car or a student loan. Think about it. The government borrowing all this money is almost like a big sponge, taking so much of the savings. Today, we are borrowing, again, more than 40 cents of every dollar the government spends. That's having a negative impact on the economy. Reducing the deficit also reduces the risk of a debt-induced financial crisis that might otherwise dwarf what we've seen happening in Greece today. But don't take my word for it. Lots of economists have looked at this. There's a great study out there that I encourage people to look at. It's done by the economists Ken Rogoff and Carmen Reinhart. And Rogoff-Reinhart do something very simple. They go around the world and look at different economies and determine what happens when debt gets too big as compared to the size of the economy. And their view is that when the debt gets to 90% of the size of an economy of a country, it has a substantial negative impact on the economic growth and jobs in that country. Their data suggests that when it gets to 90% of the economy, there's a 1% reduction in the economic growth. So instead of, in the first quarter, our U.S. economy growing at 1.8%, if we didn't have 90% of debt to our economy, it should have grown at 2.8%. And what does that mean? That 1% growth that we would otherwise have means 1 million jobs. So if we didn't have this huge debt, and right now it's at about 93 or 95% of our economy, it'll be at 100% of the economy this year, then we would have more jobs. If you look at what Rogoff and Reinhart has said, it means we'd have about 1 million more jobs in this country. Could we use those jobs? Yes. We need them desperately. So there is a connection between this overspending and this huge gap we've got between revenues and spending and our economy and our ability to get this economy back on track. Over 25 years, by the way, if we continued the way we're going, it would leave the economy nearly 1/4 smaller than it would otherwise be. Think about that, a 25% reduction in our economy. In order to create jobs and growth, we've got to balance the budget, and we've got to reduce that debt that is now over 90%. There are two ways to reduce the debt share of the economy. One is to make the debt smaller, and the other is to make the economy larger. We know that raising taxes will shrink the economy. Instead, we've got to keep tax rates low to create jobs and expand the economy. And we have to reform the tax code so that it works better. And again, economists across the spectrum will tell you we can have a better economy if we have a more sensible tax code. We must also responsibly reduce government spending, of course, to rein in the debt. Low tax rates and spending restraint will bring prosperity, alleviate this moral avalanche of debt that we're otherwise leaving on the laps of our children and grandchildren. I understand that some of my colleagues have their own approaches to this, to jobs, to the economy, to the budget deficits. That's fine. Let's have the debate. There are numerous proposals in Congress to reduce the spending, balance the budget, reform entitlements. Instead of voting on political, non-binding resolutions, as we've done this week in the United States Senate, let's have that debate. We have too many important issues. Let's stop fiddling while Rome burns. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, as we discuss the need to bring down the deficit, we should acknowledge a few basics. First is that we cannot achieve the deficit reduction we need with spending cuts to non-defense discretionary programs alone. They simply aren't large enough to make the difference that we need, and the damage that we would do to American families from drastic cuts in those programs is simply too great. Second is that in light of those facts and in the interest of basic fairness, a balanced solution to deficit spending must include revenues as well as spending cuts. If we ask college students relying on federal aid, workers in need of federal job training, and seniors in need of health care to sacrifice in the name of deficit reduction, so too should those who benefit from loopholes and handouts in the tax code, including loopholes that often benefit only highly profitable corporations. One of those huge loopholes that benefits corporations that dole out large stock option pay to their executives. Current law provides an unwarranted tax subsidy to executive stock option compensation, thereby increasing the tax burden on working families and increasing our deficit. According to the Joint Committee on Taxation, closing this loophole would reduce the deficit by about $25 billion. Today, under tax rules for reporting stock options, corporations report stock option expenses on their books when those stock options are granted, but use another method to claim a different and a typically much higher expense on their tax returns when the stock options are exercised. The result is that corporations can claim larger tax deductions for options on their tax returns than the actual expense that they show on their books for those same options. Stock options are the only type of compensation where the tax code allows a corporation to deduct more than the expense shown on their books. For all other types of compensation, cash, stock, bonuses, and others, the tax return deduction equals the book expense. In fact, if corporations deducted on their tax returns more than their books showed as compensation, it could constitute tax fraud. The sole exception to that rule is stock options. It's an exception we can no longer afford. The Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which I chair, held a hearing in June of 2007 when we examined the stock option tax gap in detail at 9 companies. We found that those 9 companies claimed tax deductions that were a combined $1 billion greater than the expenses shown on their books. Let me repeat, just 9 companies, $1 billion in excess tax deductions. Now, we were shocked by that finding, and we asked the IRS to calculate the stock option tax gap for the country as a whole. Using actual data from tax returns, the IRS found that for the first full year in which data was available, U.S. companies claimed an excess of $61 billion in stock option tax deductions compared to their book expenses. Since then, IRS data shows that the stock option tax gap has persisted for 5 years. They looked at 2005 to 2009, which was the latest year for which data was available, with the size of the excess tax deductions varying from $11 billion to $52 billion per year. These excessive deductions mean billions of dollars in reduced taxes for corporations wealthy enough to provide substantial stock option compensation to their already well-paid executives, and all at the expense of ordinary taxpayers and an increase in the deficit. It is a tax loophole that is fueling excessive executive pay, increasing the pay gap between millionaires and the middle class, and enabling profitable corporations to avoid paying their fair share to reduce the deficit. Mr. President, I'll soon be reintroducing the same legislation that I've introduced in past years to end this misalignment of the tax code. Mr. President, I would now ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to proceed as though in morning business for 8 minutes.